Long before ceramics, pumps, or chemical treatments, nomadic cultures faced a problem that never allowed for error: how to turn questionable water into something safer to drink while constantly on the move. Rivers changed, wells dried up, and surface water often carried silt, parasites, and decay. What emerged across deserts, steppes, and savannas was a deceptively simple technology that relied on gravity, time, and plant fibers rather than tools or containers. The ancient water wick filter was not a single invention tied to one culture. It was a shared solution refined independently by pastoralists, caravan traders, and hunter-herders who understood that survival depended on understanding how water moves. This method rarely appears in textbooks because it leaves little archaeological trace. Yet it appears consistently in oral traditions, travel accounts, and ethnographic records from Central Asia, North Africa, the Middle East, and parts of East Africa. Its brilliance lies in how it uses capillary action to separate cleaner water from sediment and surface contamination without disturbing the source. Why nomads needed filtration without vessels or fire? Nomadic life limited what could be carried. Heavy pottery cracked. Metal was rare and valuable. Boiling required fuel that was often scarce. In arid regions, waterholes were shared with animals, turning them into muddy reservoirs of waste and microorganisms. Drinking directly risked illness that could immobilize an entire group. The solution had to be lightweight, repairable, and functional with no tools. The water wick filter met all three requirements. How capillary action became the core principle. Capillary action is the movement of water through narrow spaces against gravity, driven by adhesion and cohesion. Nomads did not define it scientifically, but they observed it constantly in nature. Roots draw water upward. Cloth absorbs liquid slowly and evenly. When water moves through fibers or packed plant matter, heavier particles are left behind. The water wick filter exploited this behavior by allowing water to travel through a controlled medium, while contaminants remained at the source. So, what materials were traditionally used for the wick? Well, the wick was typically made from twisted plant fibers, animal hair, or even woven cloth strips. Common materials included grass cordage, wool, camel hair, flax fibers, or bark strips, depending on the region. The key requirement was absorbency, combined with structural integrity. The wick needed to stay intact while wet and allow water to travel slowly rather than gush. Slower movement meant better separation of sediment and organic debris. Now, let's talk about how the filter was set up in the field. The simplest setup involved placing one end of the wick into the water source and positioning the other end lower than the source, often dripping into a clean container or a hollowed gourd. If no container was available, the water could be collected in a depression lined with leaves or clean fabric. Gravity encouraged flow, while the wick ensured that only water that could travel through the fibers reached the collection point. Mud, insects, and surface scum remained behind. You might be wondering why this method reduced risk even without sterilization. The water wick filter did not remove all pathogens, but it significantly reduced turbidity, which is honestly critical. Clearer water contains fewer microorganisms attached to particles. Nomads often combined this method with solar exposure, allowing filtered water to sit in sunlight, or with the addition of tannin-rich plant material that inhibited bacterial growth. The Wick filter was the first line of defense, not the final step, but it dramatically improved safety compared to direct consumption. Now, let's talk about how experienced users improved the effectiveness of their water wick filters. Veteran travellers, you see, would adjust the wick's length and thickness depending on the conditions they faced. A longer wick, for example, would slow the water flow and improve its clarity. Using multiple strands could increase the volume of water filtered without sacrificing, the quality of filtration. Some cultures took this a step further by layering materials, placing coarse fibres at the intake end and finer fibres toward the outlet. Wicks were also rinsed and dried frequently to prevent any biofilm build-up. All these practices really show a keen understanding of maintenance that, mirrors the care we give to modern filters today. So, how does this technique apply to modern survival scenarios? Well, the ancient water wick filter is honestly highly relevant for today's hikers, disaster survivors and off-grid travellers. Any absorbent cord, cloth strip or fibrous material can serve as a wick in a pinch. To replicate the method, simply place the intake end into the clearest available water below the surface. Do your best to avoid disturbing any sediment, and secure the outlet end so that it drips steadily into a clean container. Give it time. Rushing really defeats the whole purpose. If you can, follow up filtration with boiling or chemical treatment, but even on its own, the wick will, noticeably improve the water's quality. Why, you might ask, does this method teach restraint as a survival skill? Well, modern filtration tends to emphasize speed and volume, but the water wick filter, it actually teaches patience. Nomads understood, quite wisely, that safe water was always worth waiting for. By letting nature do the work gradually, they managed to conserve energy and, reduce the chance for error. This mindset, honestly, is just as important as the technique itself. So, why did the water wick filter endure across so many cultures? This method spread far and wide simply because it worked everywhere. It required no real specialization and could adapt to whatever local materials were on hand. It respected the very real constraints of mobility and scarcity. Its persistence across continents is, clear evidence of its reliability. Techniques like this just don't survive thousands of years by accident. What does this forgotten knowledge reveal about ancient intelligence? The water wick filter shows us that ancient nomads were not just improvising at random. They were, in fact, engineers of necessity, carefully observing patterns and applying them consistently. Their solutions were quiet, portable, and, I must say, deeply informed by their environment. If you value field-tested knowledge that predates modern systems and, still holds up under pressure, subscribe to Backyard Wisdom and share this guide with others who respect practical history. These ancient techniques were shaped by survival, and they remain relevant wherever clean water is, uncertain.